At 2:38 a.m. in the English Channel, tension surged when the Russian warship Admiral Grigorovich carried out a dangerously close cut across directly in front of a British vessel, forcing the massive RFA Tides force into a sudden evasive turn to prevent a major collision. This was no hidden operation. Russia was moving openly and aggressively, tightening its grip on one of Europe's most important maritime routes to shield a convoy linked to its shadow oil trade. The Royal Navy found itself under intense pressure, while in Moscow the message was clear. Britain was being tested. But that confidence lasted only 7 minutes. Without warning, an electromagnetic wave disrupted the Russian fleet's radar picture, wiping out its situational awareness in an instant. In the middle of the confusion, the US Navy entered the scene. Stealth assets were already in place, quietly controlling the tactical balance before the Russian side fully understood what was happening. So was Russia about to slip away, or had it finally been outplayed? To understand why a Russian commander would take such a risk in one of the busiest waterways on Earth, you have to look at the shadow confrontation unfolding behind the scenes. This standoff came directly after London's latest pledge to go after Putin's so-called Dark Fleet. Moscow answered with 3,620 tons of pressure and firepower. The Admiral Grigorovich, a Project 11356 frigate built at the Yantar shipyard and equipped with Kalibor missiles. But this was not random aggression. It was a deliberate signal sent in response to Britain's warning. The Grigorovich advanced with its lights fully visible while running a sophisticated AIS spoofing system, creating false civilian contacts on radar and masking the convoy's true movement. Then came the warning from the Russian command center. Any attempt to interfere would be treated as a direct act of escalation. And this was not the first time Russia had pushed Britain to the limit. Before this, Russian forces had reportedly targeted Wildcat helicopter crews with high-intensity lasers. Now the pressure had moved from intimidation to direct physical maneuvering. With Britain's naval resources already stretched thin, only the support ship RFA Tides force stood in the way. The Grigorovich took advantage of that gap, slicing across at close range and forcing the British vessel into an emergency turn. Britain reacted fast. Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft launched from Scotland, while Typhoon fighters at RAF Coningsby were brought to immediate readiness. But the tactical reality was harsh. Russia was only 45 minutes away from clearing the monitored zone and disappearing into the Atlantic. The clock was running down, and the United Kingdom was staring at the possibility of a major embarrassment just off its own coast. At 2:45 a.m., the confrontation moved into the quiet battlefield of signals, sensors, and electronic warfare. In reality, the Russian fleet had stepped into a digital ambush long before a single engine ever powered up at the Yantar shipyard. The moment the ships left port, every electronic signature was picked up by US satellite surveillance and Britain's underwater detection network. Moscow was no longer advancing freely. It was moving through an intelligence net already prepared by the alliance. To hide the oil tankers, Admiral Grigorovich launched a large-scale electronic deception effort. The frigate released a dense, multispectral smokescreen while deploying 10 advanced radar decoys. These active decoys were designed to imitate the radar profile of a 4,000-ton warship. By 2:50 a.m., radar screens across the region showed a completely different picture. What had started as 3 vessels now appeared as 12 identical returns, all moving in a tightly layered pattern. The goal was clear: hide the real tankers and overwhelm the alliance's ability to make fast, accurate decisions. But the response from the US and the UK showed the power of a fully connected battlefield. Low-flying surveillance platforms switched on synthetic aperture radar. Unlike conventional radar, SAR can cut through smoke and rebuild a highly detailed 3D image of everything on the sea surface. At the same time, high above in the stratosphere, the U.S. Navy's Northrop Grumman MQ-4C Triton deployed long-range infrared sensors to track heat signatures. That gave it a crucial advantage. The Triton could detect the powerful heat coming from real ship engines, something cold radar decoys could never reproduce. Then the final piece locked into place. Every stream of data was fused through the Link 16 network. On the tactical display, the 3D structural picture was matched against the infrared heat map. And just like that, the illusion collapsed. The 10 Russian decoys showed up as empty ghosts. Without launching a single shot, US and British forces broke through the deception and identified the fleet's true position. Russian command suddenly found itself fully exposed, its carefully planned misdirection laid bare by the alliance's invisible surveillance web. At 2:52 a.m., Moscow raised the pressure again, this time in the air. From Kaliningrad, 2 Russian Air Force Su-30SM multi-role fighters pushed into international airspace. The lead aircraft locked onto a British Eurofighter Typhoon launched from RAF Coningsby. In a highly aggressive move, the Su-30SM pulled into a sharp high G turn and crossed only meters in front of the Typhoon's nose. The purpose was chillingly direct: force intense jet wash into the British aircraft's air intake and create the risk of severe engine damage in mid-air. This was a high-risk, old-school provocation designed to force the other side to back off through sheer physical pressure. But the British pilot answered with 21st century technology instead of old 20th century tactics. He held steady, ignored the aerodynamic pressure, and brought up the BAE Systems Striker 2 digital cockpit. Using eye-tracking sensors, the system links weapon targeting directly to wherever the pilot is looking. At the same moment, the Typhoon's Leonardo Captor EAES-A radar switched into burn-through mode. By focusing electromagnetic energy into a powerful concentrated beam, it punched through the Su-30's L-175V jamming system. In an instant, the Russian electronic shield stopped being effective, and the British jet gained a clean lock. The decisive moment came almost immediately. Even with the Su-30SM sitting at a 90-degree angle off the Typhoon's nose, the Striker 2 projected a digital lock directly onto the Russian aircraft's fuselage. Under the wing, the MBDA Meteor Beyond Visual Range missile confirmed a high off-bore sight lock. Powered by a ramjet engine, the Meteor gives the Typhoon a no-escape zone, far larger than that of comparable Russian missiles. Inside the Su-30SM cockpit, the warning tone suddenly screamed from an angle the pilot never expected. In that instant, Russia was forced to confront a hard truth. Its technology was no longer setting the pace. Raw aggression had just met a system that could dominate the encounter with nothing more than a glance, exposing the massive gap between brute maneuvering and true digital sensor fusion. At 3:02 a.m., while the confrontation in the skies was intensifying, an even more dangerous contest was unfolding deep below the surface. Long before the squadron entered the disputed zone, Moscow had already prepared an underwater trap. A Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine, often nicknamed the Oceanic Black Hole because of its remarkable stealth, had slipped out of Baltijsk a full week earlier. To stay hidden, it moved at extremely low speed, tucked just beneath the overwhelming noise of civilian cargo traffic, blending its presence into the constant engine hum of merchant shipping. Russia then set the underwater phase in motion by releasing a series of acoustic decoys. These devices were programmed to imitate the distinct propeller signature of a U.S. Virginia-class submarine. The idea was simple but highly sophisticated. Draw Alliance sonar crews toward false contacts, overload their tracking picture, and open a path for the real Kilo-class submarine to reposition freely and threaten British surface vessels. It was a carefully designed move aimed at exploiting the weaknesses of traditional passive sonar. But the reality had already begun to shift. Over the previous 48 hours, the hunter had quietly become the hunted. The USS Virginia, a U.S. Navy fast attack submarine, had been shadowing the Kilo ever since it moved through the Skagerrak Strait. But instead of being misled by acoustic decoys, the Alliance used a far more advanced method. A Boeing P-8 Poseidon deployed a network of multi-static sonobuoys, creating something like an underwater security grid. Rather than simply listening for the Kilo's noise, the system tracked how the submarine's steel hull disrupted sound pulses moving between the buoys. The Kilo was no longer hidden. It appeared as a moving dark shape inside a fully mapped digital net. Each buoy worked like another eye in the mesh, detecting the submarine not by what it said to the ocean, but by how it altered the space around it. As the trap tightened, the Russian commander had no choice but to break off the mission. The Kilo plunged into an emergency deep dive to avoid coming dangerously close to the pursuing Virginia-class submarine. The so-called black hole was forced out of concealment, stripped of the silence that had protected it, and pushed into a hasty withdrawal. At 3:15 a.m., as the Russian task force began forming up, the U.S. Carrier Strike Group revealed its next advantage, the Boeing EA-18G Growler. Built for electronic warfare, the aircraft slipped in from high altitude under cover of darkness and waited for the precise moment the Russian fleet began transmitting before launching a powerful digital response. The Russian move started when Admiral Grigorovich switched on its internal TK-255 electronic warfare suite, working in coordination with a nearby Vishnya-class signals intelligence ship. Together, they tried to create an electromagnetic chokehold, a heavy jamming effort meant to sweep across Alliance frequencies and drown out communications. The goal was to turn the English Channel into a full information blackout and throw US and British command networks into confusion. But the plan unraveled almost immediately because the Alliance never truly lost contact. The EA-18G Growler was equipped with the new generation ALQ-249 jamming system, advanced enough to study the rhythm and structure of Russian jamming pulses in under 3 minutes. And instead of simply blocking those signals, the system turned them against their source. Using the Russian beams themselves as a pathway, it fed junk traffic and false tactical data straight back into the Russian command network. The result was a complete reversal. Rather than shutting down US and British coordination, the Russian command center found itself overwhelmed by misleading inputs and distorted battlefield information, all flowing through its own electronic architecture. To avoid system overload and possible hardware failure caused by the alliance's countermeasures, Russian crews were forced to shut down their electronic warfare systems in a hurry. In a matter of moments, the balance flipped. The tools Russia had intended to use to blind the alliance became a Trojan horse, leaving its own fleet cut off, exposed, and operating in the dark. At 3:25 a.m., with the Russian fleet's sensor array knocked offline and its command network thrown into confusion by the Boeing EA-18G Growler's countermeasure package, the alliance delivered its final and most devastating psychological play. The Growler's ALQ-249 system sent a powerful narrowband signal straight into Admiral Grigorovich's onboard battle electronics, creating a digital illusion so convincing it felt real. In an instant, every display on the Russian bridge appeared to show a massive wave of incoming anti-ship missiles closing in fast. Inside the darkened combat information center, warning tones erupted from every direction. Alarm panels flashed non-stop. To the Russian crew, the situation looked catastrophic. Their screens seemed filled with dozens of inbound threats only seconds from impact. But in reality, nothing was in the air. There were no missiles, no physical strike, only a perfectly executed demonstration of absolute electronic and psychological control. Then, through the chaos, a calm message came through. "Hello, we see you very clearly even when you think you disappeared." That was the breaking point. The mission unraveled without a single shot being fired. By sunrise, Russian state media was already pushing headlines about a bold breakthrough against Western pressure. It was a carefully crafted half-truth, meant to protect the Kremlin's image and shape the global narrative. But out at sea, the real picture was impossible to hide. Admiral Grigorovich and the two oil tankers, stripped of reliable electronic warfare support and with navigation capability severely reduced, were forced to slow to a crawl. Their formation collapsed. They were no longer moving like hunters, but like vessels under close escort, shadowed from every angle. Silently, they crossed the water under the watch of American and British systems, tracking them from the seabed to the edge of the atmosphere, until they were pushed out of the area like the last remnants of a failed operation. Putin brought a 20th century mindset into a 21st century battlefield. In these waters, the United States and the United Kingdom were not simply responding to Russia's playbook, they were rewriting the rules entirely. When you confront a network-centered force that can see through deception and track movement across air, sea, and undersea space, you stop being a rival and become just another signal on the screen. Welcome to the top tier.